State Police Command confirms the killing of suspected kidnapper and the rescue of 2 abductees. In Ogun State, People's Democratic Party governorship candidate Oladipupo Adebutu files petition before Election Petitions Tribunal, seeking an order declaring him as the winner of the election. Labour Party in Ogun State recommends 8 executive members of the party, including the former acting National Publicity Secretary Abayomi Arabambi, the state chairman Michael Ashade, and 6 others being expelled from the party. On the foreign scene, Israeli forces have started manhunt for perpetrators of the attack in West Bank, where 2 settlers were killed. Good evening. This is News at 7 on Western Spring Television. My name is Tunde Ido. We begin with security, as the Lagos State Police Command has confirmed the killing of a suspected kidnapper and the rescue of 2 abductees during a raid on a kidnapper's den in the Ikorodu area of the state. The State Police Public Relations Officer Benjamin Hondenyi, who confirmed the development today, said the operation took place yesterday night. He explained that during the raid, the kidnappers engaged policemen in a gun duel, adding that after killing one of the suspects, the rescued victims were rushed to a nearby hospital for treatment. And now to politics. Exactly 20 days after the governorship election was held in Ogun State, the People's Democratic Party governorship candidate Oladipupo Adebutu has filed a petition before the Election Petitions Tribunal, seeking an order declaring him as the winner of the election. The Independent National Electoral Commission had declared Governor Dapo Abiodun of the All Progressive Congress as the winner, having polled a total of 276,298 votes to defeat Adebutu, who scored 262,383 votes. Adebutu and a member of his legal team, Godi Uche, as well as party chieftains, stormed the tribunal secretariat at Ishabo Magistrate Court premises in Abeokuta and filed voluminous copies of the petition. Speaking with newsmen, Adebutu said he believed he won the election. Spokesperson for the Labour Party Presidential Campaign Council, Yunusa Tanko, has said the leadership crisis rocking the Labour Party is not just an attack on the national chairman, Julius Abure, but a ploy to derail the drive by the party's flag bearers, Peter Obi, and his vice, Yusuf Deiti Baba Ahmed. Tanko stated that according to the constitution, the national chairman of the party can be removed from office on the vote of no confidence passed by at least 2/3 majority of the National Convention, convened solely for the consideration of such motion, an action which he argued was yet to be taken. Tanko said, pending when the courts have given their injunctions, members of the party must obey the constitution and seek first to resolve their issues internally.
With regard to the issue of the court case, it was very clear that some certain individuals who feel they are being kind of sponsored and then being, being aided in order to destroy the legacy that is already been built over the years, collaborated and conspire against the leadership of the party. But interestingly also, the court now has already said, okay, stay action on this particular matter until when the substantive case has already been established. So we will wait so that until when the cases itself has already been adjudicated, and then the court make pronouncement accordingly. That's as far as we can say on the matter, since it's already in the court of law. But as it remains, the party leadership still remains in focus. The chairman of the party, Barrister Julius Abure, and then the secretary of the party, the treasurer of the party, Ms. Oluchi and Umar Farouk and Ojuku are all very much in their positions until when the court says otherwise.
Meanwhile, the Labour Party in Ogun State has recommended that 8 executive members of the party, including the former acting National Publicity Secretary Abayomi Arabambi, the state chairman Michael Ashade, and 6 others be expelled from the party. The recommendation for expulsion was made known through a press statement that was issued by the State Publicity Secretary of the party, Tokunbo Peters, stating that the recommendation was due to various alleged anti-party activities carried out by the affected executive members of the party. Peters said the recommendations had been communicated formally to the National Secretariat of the party last week. He said Arabambi and Ashade were recently suspended by the wards and local government areas executive members in the state and were later recommended for expulsion from the party by the state exco of the party. According to the statement, others recommended for expulsion were Fisayo Michael, Tosin Midals, Sheon Ogunyemi, and Lizzie Olise Samuel, who were former state secretary, state organizing secretary, state auditor, and state financial secretary, respectively. The Benue State Governor Samuel Otham has accrued his failed senatorial bid to unfavorable condition, claiming the market was not good. He said with his failed senatorial bid, he would likely return to his farm or find something else to do after he hands over to the incoming administration on May 29, 2023. Otham's senatorial aspiration was dashed following his defeat on February 25th when he lost to his former aide, Titus Zam. He was also among the G5 governors who lost their senatorial bids. He added that despite his loss, he was consoled by the fact that the G5 governors achieved the dream of ensuring that the presidency returned to the South. Nobel Prize winner Wole Soyinka has challenged the vice presidential candidate of the Labour Party, Yusuf Daiti Baba Ahmed, to a one-on-one interview regarding the nation's democracy at this time in its history. Speaking on Wednesday, Daiti Baba Ahmed called on President Muhammadu Buhari and the Chief Justice of Nigeria not to swear in Bola Tinubu, whom INEC declared as the president-elect, insisting that declaring Tinubu a winner and issuing him a certificate of return was against the Constitution. Baba Ahmed went on to stress that whoever swears in Mr. Tinubu has ended democracy in Nigeria, a position that did not sit well with Professor Soyinka. Reacting to the interview that elicited great criticism from political stakeholders, as well as a 5 million naira fine for the TV station, the Nobel laureate described the remarks as a kind of do-or-die attitude and provocation that goes contrary to democratic disposition. Soyinka said the Labour Party vice presidential candidate tried to dictate to the supreme arbiter of the nation, adding that it was unacceptable. The Presidential Campaign Council of the All Progressive Congress, APC, has urged U.S. President Joe Biden to trash an open letter addressed to him by famed author Chimamanda Adichie. Chimamanda, in an open letter to U.S. President Joe Biden, published in The Atlantic yesterday, noted that the spokesperson for the U.S. Department of State had acknowledged the frustration expressed over the conduct of the polls and technical glitches. She expressed confusion that the envoy described the process as a competitive election that represents a new period for Nigerian politics and democracy. Responding in a brief tweet today, the APC-PCC Director of Media and Publicity, Bayo Onanuga, urged President Biden to dispose of the letter as soon as it arrives. While Chimamanda restated her support to Peter Obi in her letter to the U.S. president, the novelist made no mention of doing so based on ethnicity. In another development, Nigeria's Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka has condemned the National Broadcasting Commission (NBC) over sanctions imposed on Channels Television for a March 22nd interview with Labour Party vice presidential candidate Daiti Baba Ahmed. In spite of the Independent National Electoral Commission declaring Bola Tinubu the president-elect, the Labour Party running mate held that the All Progressive Congress had failed to satisfy the requirements of the Constitution for election to the office of the president. Following the interview with Daiti Ahmed on the program Politics Today, the NBC imposed a 5 million naira fine on Channels Television. However, in a statement today, Soyinka argued that to sustain the penalty is to give joy to others who turn the internet into a septic tank for depositing their waste. The Nobel laureate made the assertion while stating his position on what he described as fascism and a climate of fear being generated by political actors whom he said have refused to entertain corrective criticism. And in all the news, days after he wrote to the clerk of the criminal court in Old Bailey, London, to intercede on behalf of embattled former Deputy Senate President Ikwe Ekweremadu, Nigerians have expressed divergent views over the action by former President Olusegun Obasanjo. While some Nigerians believe the letter plugs a diplomatic loophole created by the country's leadership. Others believe that the former president overreached himself. Emmanuel Ujuadugele's report examines these reactions.
It's been weeks since former Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu, his wife Beatrice, and their doctor Obin Naubeta were found guilty by an Old Bailey jury of conspiracy to facilitate and arrange travel with the aim of exploitation. Reactions have not stopped trailing the 6-week trial where Senator Ekweremadu was found culpable of violating the Modern Slavery Act, and the latest in the string of reactions is tied to a letter written by former President Olusegun Obasanjo. Addressed to the Chief Clerk of the Criminal Court, Old Bailey, London, Chief Obasanjo's letter acknowledged the crime committed by the Ekweremadus, but begged the court to temper justice with mercy. This letter immediately divided Nigerians right down the middle, as some threw their weight behind his gesture, while others described it as hypocritical and an interference in the dispensation of justice. A United Kingdom-based lawyer, Dr. Misbah Lateef, toes the line of the latter argument, saying that letter by the former president is of no impact.
It is a different thing where you are engaged in public advocacy, asking for the court to be lenient towards a particular defendant or accused person. People do that. You could maybe write an open letter, engage publicists and all of those things. But when you write directly to the court, and this is where the danger lies, in the manner that Mr. Obasanjo has done, as I said, you are in a way, or you could be seen to even be interfering with the due process of criminal justice system, because that is not the way an allocutus is done. And you can imagine, if a system is allowed to run in that manner, whereby just anybody can throw their weight around, write letter to the court, imagine someone writing a letter to the CJ of Nigeria or to the registrar of that court, because when you normally engage with the court, you write through the registrar, just as Mr. Obasanjo has written now to the clerk of that court. So you are trying to, in a way, interfere with the judge and the process. So that is not the practice. That is not the norm. That is not the standard.
Dr. Lateef also believes the letter may further compound Senator Ekweremadu's legal woes.
The letter that Mr. Obasanjo has written in a purely criminal case, I fear, as I said earlier, that the letter might actually work against the defendant in this case, because by all standard norms, including, I would say, diplomacy and all of that, this is not how the criminal justice system works. That letter appears to me very dangerous. It is, as I described it elsewhere, a meddlesome interloper letter, which is in a way seeking an undue interference, in a due criminal justice system. The British system doesn't work like that.
Some say Chief Obasanjo's actions may have fallen within the character witness or evidence principle, but Dr. Lateef disagrees.
Character evidence under common law, or that is practiced in a criminal prosecution, is a formal process in the court. It would have been different now if Mr. Obasanjo was a witness in that case. The law allows him to say all of those things before the court in a formal proceeding. But writing a letter, the judge will not rely on that. That letter is useless. I was being careful not to use that word, but I just have to be very frank here. That judge, just imagine that every Tom, Dick, and Harry in Nigeria pick up their pen and paper and write letter like that. How many of them will the judge rely on? Judges are not supposed to be bound by public opinion. They're not supposed to be bound by worthless letters. They are supposed to be bound by the evidence adduced before them in a trial proceeding, in a formal proceeding.
According to Dr. Lateef, Nigeria's judicial system can get to the level of the United Kingdom's if only there are no exemptions made for the high and mighty.
To achieve the same standard in Nigeria, we just have to apply the law equally to everyone. And as I said earlier, an ordinary Nigerian citizen would have been left to face his music, as it were. But when the elites, when they try to circumvent the law, they throw all of this sentiment around. If you go back to the proceeding in that case again, you will see that the judge again harped so much on the status of Mr. Ekweremadu that he ought to have known. He should have known. The prosecutor said all of that. So if you apply the law equally to everyone, regardless of status, of race, of gender, and all of that, I'm telling you, our system will be better for it.
Sonia, the ailing daughter of the Ekweremadus and the third defendant, was not found guilty. All three guilty persons will be provisionally sentenced on May 5th, and attention will be on the UK to see what verdict is given. Emmanuel Ujadigele, Western Spring Television News.
The House of Representatives has asked the Niger Delta Development Commission, NDDC, to put on hold the release of 15 billion naira counterpart funding requested by the federal government for a humanitarian intervention program. The lower legislative chamber passed a resolution at yesterday's plenary following the adoption of a motion of urgent public importance sponsored by Uyeme Idem, a People's Democratic Party lawmaker from Akwa Ibom. While moving the motion, Uyemi told his colleagues that the federal government requested the fund from the ministry without the parliament's approval. The lawmaker said the request by the federal government without requisite financial appropriation and approval is illegal and a breach of the Appropriation Act. Following the adoption of the motion, the lawmakers asked the Committee on NDDC to scrutinize the federal government's request and report back to the House within 2 weeks. You're watching News at 7 on Western Spring Television. Still to come. United States, South Korea, and Japan express concern over North Korea's cyber activities. We'll bring you more on this when we return.
Ahmadu Bello, Prince Royal, was born 6th of December 1910 at Raba Village, Sokoto, northwestern Nigeria. His father was a district head and heir apparent to the Sultanate throne from the house of Usmanu Danfodio, a religious and social reformer who brought the Habib dynasty under the Fulani Caliphate in the beginning of the 19th century. Ahmadu Bello raised the bar of political consciousness and participation when, in 1944, he engineered the establishment of the Northern People's Congress (NPC) as the first political party in northern Nigeria and the rallying point for politicians in the region before independence. History will not forget Ahmadu Bello for his charisma and political sagacity, which provided easy passage for his kinsmen to assume political and administrative positions in Nigeria's post-independence era. The distinguished elder statesman and Sardauna of Sokoto has his face on his country's 200 naira currency as a mark of honor to one of the architects of Nigeria's independence. Western Spring Television identifies Ahmadu Bello as a watershed character in history. Born Jeremiah Oyeni Obafemi on March 6, 1905, Obafemi Awolowo was a prime architect of Nigeria's independence and most consummate advocate of free education and social welfare in Africa's most populous nation. Erudite politician, thinker, and philosopher, Awo was fondly addressed by associates and political colleagues, brought his unique attributes to bear on governance in the defunct Western region. He administered as leader of government business and the premier between 1955 and 1958. Obafemi Awolowo's premiership witnessed pioneering in multi-sectoral policy initiatives and execution. The Western region under his administration paraded several enviable records. First television station in Africa, first real estate in Nigeria, first high-rise building in Nigeria, first modern sports stadium in Nigeria, first agricultural settlement in Nigeria, first modern civil service secretariat in Nigeria, and first industrial estate in Nigeria. His face is on 100 naira denomination as a mark of honor for his distinguished services to his country. Western Spring Television identifies Obafemi Awolowo as a major character in history.
Welcome back. This is still News at 7 on Western Spring Television. A reminder of our headlines. The Lagos State Police Command has confirmed the killing of a suspected kidnapper and the rescue of 2 abductees during a raid on a kidnapper's den in the Ikorodu area of the state. Exactly 20 days after the governorship election was held in Ogun State, the People's Democratic Party governorship candidate Oladipupo Adebutu has filed a petition before the Election Petitions Tribunal seeking an order declaring him as the winner of the election. The Labour Party in Ogun State has recommended that 8 executive members of the party, including the former acting National Publicity Secretary Abayomi Arabambi, the state chairman Michael Ashade, and 6 others, be expelled from the party. And on the foreign scene, Israeli forces have started a manhunt for the perpetrators of the attack in the West Bank, in which 2 settlers were killed. And on the foreign scene, Israeli forces have started a manhunt for the perpetrators of the attack in the West Bank, in which 2 settlers were killed. 2 people were killed after gunmen opened fire on a vehicle in the occupied West Bank as tensions between Israel and the Palestinians intensifies. It was gathered that the Israeli army had set up a checkpoint to inspect cars on the main roads at an intersection near the illegal settlement of Hamra in the northern Jordan Valley, where the incident took place. According to Israeli media, the 2 settlers who were killed in a shooting attack in the occupied West Bank were sisters in their 20s, while the 3rd victim, a 45-year-old woman who was critically injured in the attack, was their mother. And here in Africa, Togo's parliament has extended for 12 months the state of security emergencies in the Savannes region in the far north of the country to help prevent incursions by jihadist groups across the border with Burkina Faso. Decreed in June 2022 by President Faure Gnassingbé, the state of emergency ended a few weeks ago after a forced extension of 6 months in September. A state of security emergency allows security forces and local authorities more flexibility to take urgent measures to combat threats from militant groups. Speaking before lawmakers, Minister of Security General Damahin Yak said the situation remains worrying in the far north of the country in view of the persistence of new attempts, most of them valiantly repelled by the defense and security forces. Togo is a small country in West Africa, sandwiched between Benin in the east, Ghana in the west, and Burkina Faso in the north. Since November 2021, it has been subject to attacks in the far north, near the border with Burkina Faso, where jihadist groups control large parts of the country. And still in Africa, more than 30 people were killed in the Democratic Republic of Congo's Ituri province earlier this week in attacks attributed to a rebel group affiliated with the Islamic State jihadist group. The Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, originally an insurgency in Uganda, gained a foothold in eastern DRC in the 1990s and has been accused of killing thousands of civilians. In a statement released yesterday evening, the UN mission in the DRC, known as MONUSCO, said it had received reports of killings attributed to the ADF that occurred on Sunday and Monday on the border between the territories of Mambasa and Irumo. MONUSCO head Bintu Keita condemned the killings and attacks against the civilian population and called for an immediate end to violence by all armed groups against civilians. According to a recent report from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, an estimated 485 civilians were killed between December 1st and March 14th in Ituri, a province plagued with violence due to several armed groups operating there, including the ADF. And in Asia, the United States, South Korea, and Japan have expressed concern over what they described as North Korea's malicious cyber activities in support of its banned weapons programs. According to the United Nations, cryptocurrency funds stolen by North Korean hackers have been a key source of funding for the country's weapons program, with such theft reaching a record last year. The 3 countries' envoy in a joint statement reiterated concerns that overseas Pyongyang workers continued using forged identities and nationalities to evade UN sanctions and raise funds for missile programs. The US and South Korea have been conducting a series of annual springtime exercises since March, including air and sea drills and their first large-scale amphibious landing drills in 5 years. North Korea has reacted furiously to the exercises, calling them a rehearsal for invasion. Pakistan's top intelligence agency has arrested a high-value target in an operation against a Baloch rebel group in the country's southwest. The military, in a statement today, said Gulzar Imam, also known by the name Shambe, is the founder and leader of the banned Baloch Nationalist Army. It disclosed that the BNA, an umbrella group for Baloch rebels, was formed after the Baloch Republican Army and United Baloch Army merged into one group. The army said the BNA had been involved in dozens of terrorist attacks in the country, including those on security forces. The military said the arrest was made possible after a month-long intelligence report, but did not provide further details. In the Middle East, Saudi Arabia-led military coalition has lifted 8-year-old restrictions on imports headed for Yemen's southern port as moves towards peace continue. The announcement signals progress in peace talks with the Houthi rebel groups in the north and follows the easing of restriction on commercial goods entering the Houthi-held western port of Hodeidah, the country's main seaport. It comes as Yemen's warring sides work to reinstate an expired United Nations brokered truce. The Saudi-backed government, based in the south, in a statement late yesterday, said commercial ships will be allowed to dock directly in southern ports, including Aden, and all goods will be cleared, with some exceptions. There was no immediate response from the Saudi government. And to the Russia-Ukraine war, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said Moscow wants any Ukraine peace talks to be centered on creating a new world order. Mr. Lavrov stated this during his visit to Turkey, adding that any negotiation needs to take into account Russian interests. He added that Russia rejects a unipolar world order led by one hegemon. This comes as Ukraine rejected a proposition from Brazil President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who suggested Kiev gave up Crimea to end the war. Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesman Oleg Nikolenko stated that there was no legal, political, or moral reason that will justify Kiev yielding a centimeter of its land. And moving on, secret documents that provide details of US and NATO plans to help prepare Ukraine for a spring offensive against Russia have spilled onto social media platforms. The New York Times reported that the documents were posted on social media and Russian channels. The Pentagon said yesterday that it was assessing the apparent security breach. The Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh said it was aware of the reports of social media posts, adding that the department is reviewing the matter. The documents were spread on Twitter and Telegram and reportedly contains charts and details about the weapons deliveries, battalion strengths, and other sensitive information. There was no explanation as to how the plans were obtained. Moscow has finally charged U.S. journalist Evan Gashivkevich with espionage, but he denied the accusation. The arrest of Wall Street Journal correspondent prompted an outcry from media outlets and right groups as well as government officials in Washington. Gashivkevich's arrest is seen as a serious escalation of Moscow's crackdown on the media. The case has been classified as secret, limiting the amount of information available. His arrest also comes as Moscow's relationship with Washington has been severely downgraded because of the Ukraine offensive. Washington has long accused Moscow of arbitrarily arresting Americans in order to secure the release of detained Russians. And in other news, a research team in China has published analyses of samples taken more than 3 years ago from the market linked to the outbreak of COVID-19. The Hunan Seafood and Wild Market in Wuhan has been a focal point in the search for the origin of the coronavirus. But this is the first peer-reviewed study of biological evidence gathered from the market back in 2020. The research reveals swabs that tested positive for the virus also contain genetic materials from wild animals. By linking the virus with animals sold in the market, it could open new lines of inquiry into how the outbreak began. The United States Republican lawmakers in Tennessee voted yesterday to expel 2 Democratic legislators who joined the protest on the House floor last week after a deadly school shooting in Nashville. Daniel Odeyemi takes a look at the development and matters arising.
Lawmakers in Tennessee yesterday voted to expel 2 Democratic legislators who joined a protest on the House floor last week after a deadly school shooting in Nashville. Protesters had on the 30th of March gathered at the state capitol, and Democratic representatives Justin Jones, Gloria Johnson, and Justin Pearson led a chant of power to the people from the House floor to protest the latest series of mass shootings in Tennessee and demand gun laws. It will be recalled that on March 27th, 6 people were killed, including 3 children and 1 injured at Covenant School in the Green Hills neighborhood in Nashville. The perpetrator, a 28-year-old former student, was also killed. 2 days later, 2 people were killed and 5 injured outside a restaurant in Memphis. The Grand Old Party supermajority had accused the representatives of breaking House rules on conduct and decorum. Representative Jones lamented the move, stating all he and his colleagues did was to call for a ban on assault weapons and demand that the House act on gun legislation. Each of the lawmakers facing expulsion was given time to speak ahead of the vote.
We called for you all to ban assault weapons, and you respond with an assault on democracy. And I say to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that no matter what you vote, you have the votes, but you will not be victorious, because there are generations of young people who see what is going on. One of your colleagues who was an admitted child molester sat in this chamber, no expulsion. One member sits in this chamber who was found guilty of domestic violence, no expulsion.
In his remarks, Pearson invoked the civil rights movement and civil disobedience, saying the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of putting consciousness above rule.
This is not normal. This is not okay. If you look at what it takes to expel a member, or what it should take, most of the times that a member in the Tennessee State Legislature have gotten expelled, in the last 2 times in particular, one, the guy committed sexual assault against 22 people. The other committed bribery. We broke a House rule because we're fighting for kids who are dying from gun violence and people in our communities who want to see an end to the proliferation of weaponry in our communities, and that leads to our expulsion. This is not democracy.
Following the expulsion of 2 of the 3 Democratic lawmakers, Tennessee House Speaker Cameron Sexton said that he is concerned about the House floor following the process and procedures that are laid down and not having a protest on the floor.
Expulsion was put out on Monday. They had their process on Thursday. One representative had the ability to get 2 attorneys here to represent her. And so they were able to have the ability to defend themselves, and that's what they did.
Democrats see the action as blatant revenge and an extreme enforcement of conduct rules using an expulsion mechanism typically reserved for criminal activity. The White House even weighed in on Wednesday, with Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre accusing Republican lawmakers of focusing on rebuking Democrats for protesting rather than on ways to prevent further school shootings.
We saw news that Republican legislators in Tennessee were preparing to vote on the expulsion of 3 Democratic officials who stood in solidarity with children and families peacefully protesting for action on gun safety. The fact that this vote is happening is shocking, undemocratic, and without precedent.
The first expulsion of lawmakers from any state legislative body in the United States is extremely rare. The Tennessee House had previously expelled only 8 lawmakers. 6 of them were Confederate racists in the 19th century for refusing to affirm the citizenship of formerly enslaved black people, 1 in the 20th century for a conviction of bribery, and 1 in the 21st century for sexual misconduct. The expulsion of these representatives is now a subject of debate as to whether it was a proper response,
considering the fact that the representatives participated in peaceful protest against gun violence, an aftermath of sad events that had claimed lives, howbeit, against house rules on conduct and decorum. There have been 134 cases of mass shooting in the United States this year alone, with 196 people dead, including the shooters, and 470 injured. Last month, President Joe Biden signed an executive order to expand the use of background checks for firearm purchases as the United States grapples with persistent and devastating mass shootings. Daniel Odeyemi, Western Spring Television News.
Former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has vowed to survive another period in hospital as the 86-year-old media mogul showed signs of improvement following treatment for leukemia and a lung infection. The billionaire, who has dominated Italian public life for decades, was admitted on Wednesday to the intensive care cardiac unit at Milan's San Raffaele Hospital. Outside the hospital, a few supporters, including fans from Monza, the football club he owns, gathered to show their support. The declining health of Berlusconi, a three-time prime minister, has meant he has been in and out of the hospital in recent years. His latest admission to San Raffaele Hospital came just a week after being discharged after a 4-day stay. Still ahead, Russian ruble falls to its lowest value for a year shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine. We have more on this and other business stories after this break. Please stay with us.
The Korean War of 1950 to 1953 pitched North and South Korea against each other in response to intrigues by nations beyond their border with different interests from those canvassed by the two brother nations. The Korean War had all the nuances of an external conflict induced by powers that were interested in subjugating North and South Korea. Japan had leveraged on its military power to annex Korea in 1900 and imposed a military union that did not sit well with the citizens. Japan not only lost its war of conquest against Korea, all its powers were obliterated by the effect of the World War II. The end of World War II got Korea divided into two nations along 38 parallel lines by the instrumentality of the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. The Korean War lapsed into a Cold War when it stopped the prying eyes of external forces into the internal affairs of a nation now divided along its north and southern territories. Western Spring Television identifies the Korean War as a major event in history. Funmilayo Ransome Kuti was an educationist and advocate of women's rights. She was recognized for her vitriolic comments against colonial policy of taxation as it affected the Nigerian women. Bere, as fondly addressed by her women followers, Funmilayo championed the initiation of universal adult suffrage, which gave an unprecedented leeway for women to contest elective offices and power to exercise voting rights. Married to a foremost educationist and teacher, Israel Oladotun Ransome Kuti, the first president of Nigeria Union of Teachers, Funmilayo Ransome Kuti was the mother of children who inherited her spirit of activism. Olufela Anbe Ololari, the former, a renowned musical legend. She was the first female student of Abeokuta Grammar School and the first female to own and drive a car in Nigeria. The award recipient of Member of Order of Nigeria MON and Lenin Peace Prize, was born 25th October 1900 and was killed on 13th April 1978 by rampaging road soldiers in Lagos. Western Spring Television identifies Funmilayo Ransome Kuti as a watershed character in history. The British Empire was the largest and the most powerful in the world. At its zenith, the empire embraced a quarter of the Earth's land surface and imposed her Imperial Majesty's rule on more than 458 million peoples across nations and continents. The empire took off with overseas possessions and trading posts established by England, spread over 3 million kilometers between 16th and early 18th century. Like previous empires, the British Empire began to crumble on its weight of overstretched territories and growing unrest in our various colonies. Today, the British Empire no longer exists. What is in place is the Commonwealth of Nations, a loose association of sovereign states which recognize the King of England as the titular head. Western Spring Television identifies the British Empire as a watershed empire in history.
You're welcome back. Now to business stories. The Russian ruble has fallen to its lowest value for a year since shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine. The currency slid to 82 rubles against the US dollar this morning on the Moscow Stock Exchange. Russia has been hit with massive economic sanctions since it began an offensive in Ukraine in February 2022. Earlier this year, Russia said its economy had shrunk by 2.1% in 2022, far lower than the 15% fall that had been predicted. The ruble also slid by 2% to 90.06 against the euro this morning. The House of Representatives is set to begin a probe for an alleged diversion of 20 billion naira by some staff of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited. As plenary yesterday, the House set up an ad hoc committee for the purpose of the probe following the adoption of a motion by Hafiz Ibrahim Kawu. According to Kawu, NNPC staff were reported to have diverted over 20 billion naira in the semblance of consultancy fees paid to its consultants. He regretted that the staff of the company were diverting funds at the time the federal government was trying to fight corruption and harness resources for infrastructure development. And in the world of sports, Christian Eriksen will return to Manchester United matchday squad for Saturday's Premier League game against Everton after recovering from an ankle injury. Erik ten Hag feared would cause him to miss the rest of the season. Eriksen was caught by a tackle from Reading striker Andy Carroll during United's 3-1 FA Cup win on January 28th and left Old Trafford on crutches. He has not featured for Ten Hag's side since. Eriksen looked set to be out of action for 3 months, and although happy he has returned ahead of schedule, Ten Hag is still upset at how the injury was caused.
And yeah, we have to see how it will progress to coming week. And the good news is Christian Eriksen back in training, and he will be back tomorrow in the squad. I think it was not for nothing. I was so angry about that bad tackle. And yeah, he was away. And we feared that we lost him for the whole season, but he worked very well. I think the medical department did really well. And in togetherness, he's already returning into the squad and so available for the final stages of the season. So we are very pleased with that.
Manchester City boss Pep Guardiola says Erling Haaland is ready to return for their Premier League game at Southampton on Saturday. Haaland missed last weekend's 4-1 home win over Liverpool with a groin injury, but the 22-year-old returned to training earlier this week, and Guardiola confirmed his availability for the trip to St. Mary's Stadium.
Yeah, the last part of the season, no more international break, so it depends on us how many games we're going to play for the Premier League for sure, but the FA Cup and Champions League, we'll see what happens, and yeah, so we know exactly. So win game, we are live, no win, out.
How's Erling Haaland?
Yeah, training the last 2 days really good, so we'll be ready.
Does he need to get minutes for you in this Southampton game to be ready for Bayern Munich as well?
Bayern Munich is the last thought, so it's Southampton. So Premier League is every day, every week, and it depends on that.
Asisa Tushuola returned to the Super Falcons side in style, scoring as Nigeria beats Haiti 2-1 in a World Cup warm-up game today. The Barcelona feminine star has been absent from the Falcons team for months, but made an instant impact on her return to coach Randy Waldrum's side. While the Super Falcons dominated play in the early part of the game, they failed to breach the Haitian defense. However, in the 40th minute, Esther Okoronkwo finally scored from a free kick to hand Nigeria the lead. And that's all at this hour, but before we go, here is a recap of our major stories. The Lagos State Police Command has confirmed the killing of a suspected kidnapper and the rescue of 2 abductees during a raid on a kidnapper's den in the Ikorodu area of the state. Exactly 20 days after the governorship election was held in Ogun State, the People's Democratic Party governorship candidate Oladipo Adebutu has filed a petition before the Election Petitions Tribunal seeking an order declaring him as the winner of the election. The Labour Party in Ogun State has recommended that 8 executive members of the party, including the former acting National Publicity Secretary Abayomi Arabambi, the state chairman Michael Ashade, and 6 others be expelled from the party. And on the foreign scene, Israeli forces have started a manhunt for the perpetrators of the attack in the West Bank in which 2 settlers were killed. Please do follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. You have a splendid night. I am Tunde Idowu.